He rescued her from a blizzard, but he had no idea she was hiding a secret that could destroy everything he owned. On a lonely mountain buried under snow, a blind woman and a hardened bounty hunter are forced to trust each other while powerful enemies close in from every side. Before this story ends, someone will lose everything, and someone will finally discover what freedom truly means.
4 in the morning. The kind of cold that snaps trees in half. Silas Boone sat by the hearth. Just him, the dying embers, and a hunting knife. Scrape, pause, scrape, steel sliding on stone. His breath plumed in the dark room. He didn't really need to sharpen the blade. He just needed to stop thinking. But the piece of paper on the table wouldn't let him. A foreclosure notice from the Coldwater Bank. They wanted his land, his mountain. The only place he'd then found any quiet since he hung up his bounty hunter's badge. He sheathed the knife, grabbed his heavy wool coat. By the time Silas rode his roan, gelding down into the town of Coldwater, the sky was a bruised purple. The temperature sat at 30 below zero. The wind didn't just blow. It bit. It chewed right through leather and denim. Town was dead quiet. Smart folks stayed inside. But Silas needed coffee, flour, and cartridges, and the mountain didn't care about the weather. He tied his horse to the post outside, the general store. He was brushing the ice from his beard when the store's heavy wooden door banged open. A man shoved a woman out onto the icy boardwalk. It was Whitmore, the local fat cat, the town's loudest voice and smallest soul. The woman hit the floorboards hard. A wooden tray clattered beside her. Matches scattered like broken teeth across the frost. Silas stepped closer. He saw her eyes, clouded over, blind. She was wearing a dress meant for autumn and a shawl so thin it was basically paper. She shivered violently, her bare fingers scrambling over the freezing wood to find the matches. "You don't come back in until every last one is sold," Whitmore hollered, his face red and ugly. "I don't care if you freeze, Mary. You earn your keep, or you sign the damn property papers. Your choice." Silas stopped. He knew violence. He'd lived it for 20 years chasing outlaws. He'd seen men shoot each other over $1. But this was a different kind of sickness. Whitmore grabbed her by the arm. He hauled her up just to shake her. Silas moved. He didn't run. He just walked up the steps, heavy and quiet, his thick leather glove clamped over Whitmore's wrist like an iron vise. He squeezed. Whitmore gasped. His fingers went slack, dropping the girl's arm. Silas shoved the man back. Not hard, just enough to make him stumble against the doorframe. "Who the hell do you think you are, Boone?" Whitmore spat, cradling his wrist. "She's my niece. I'm her legal guardian. It's family business." Silas didn't blink. The snow settled on his wide shoulders. He looked Whitmore dead in the eye. His voice was low, but it cut straight through the howling wind. "Poverty or legal guardianship does not make a person your slave," Silas said. The words were heavy, deliberate. Forcing a blind woman into hard labor in a blizzard isn't discipline. It is a crime against the most basic human right to live. This society has laws, and if the law won't stop you, I will. Whitmore sneered. He took a step back, hiding behind the doorway. "You're a broke mountain man. You can't even pay your own banknote. What are you going to do?
Take her?"
Silas looked down at Mary. She was kneeling, again, feeling for her spilled matches. Her hands were turning blue. He crouched down beside her. "Ma'am?" Silas said softly. "I have a cabin up the slope. I need a hand with the chores. I'll pay you a fair wage. You want out of here?" He expected her to flinch, to cry, to panic. Women in town usually shrank from him. They saw the jagged scar across his cheek. They knew his reputation. Mary didn't flinch. She stopped moving. She stood up, slow, steady. She brushed the snow from her skirt with trembling, freezing hands. She didn't try to look at his face. Instead, she angled her ear toward his chest, locking on to the source of his voice. "How far is the well from your front door?" she asked. Her voice shook from the cold, but not from fear. Silas frowned. 15 paces. Is the terrain flat between the barn and the house? Mostly. Slight dip to the left. Are the stairs to the porch solid, or is the wood rotting? Solid oak. 3 steps. She nodded once. A sharp, decisive motion. "I'll take the job." No tears, no hesitation. Just cold, hard survival. Silas didn't waste time. He picked her up by the waist. She was as light as a bird. He set her sideways on his saddle, then swung up behind her, taking the reins. Whitmore was shouting something from the porch, but the wind swallowed it whole. They rode out of town. The snow was falling thicker now, erasing their tracks the moment the horse lifted its hooves. Silas looked at the back of Mary's head as she sat stiffly in front of him. Then it hit him, like a kick to the chest from a startled mule. She hadn't asked if he was dangerous. She hadn't asked about the pay. She hadn't asked if he had food or blankets. She only asked about the layout of his exact piece of land, the precise terrain of his mountain. She wasn't just running away from her uncle. She wasn't just looking for shelter. She had planned this. She needed to get up to his property. And he had just opened the door and given her a ride. The ride up the mountain was brutal. The wind screamed through the pines. It whipped the snow into a blinding white wall. Silas kept his head down. He guided the roan by memory and muscle. Mary sat in front of him. She was stiff freezing, but she didn't complain, not a single word. They reached the cabin just as the storm swallowed the sun. Silas kicked the door open. He carried her inside and set her down on the braided rug near the hearth. He struck a match, lit the oil lamp. Then he built a fire, quick and efficient. The heat bloomed in the small room. The smell of dry pine and old coffee filled the air. "Stay by the fire," Silas said. He pulled off his heavy coat. "I'll fetch some blankets. You need to thaw out." He turned toward the bedroom, but he heard a sound, a soft scuff of a boot on the floorboards. He looked back. Mary wasn't sitting. She was walking. Her hands were out, fingers extended, touching the rough-hewn log walls. She took slow measured steps. 1, 2, 3. She paused, reached down, touched the edge of the wooden dining table. 4, 5. She found the iron stove, felt the heat radiating from the iron belly. Silas frowned. He stepped forward. "Miss Caldwell, you ought to sit. You don't know this room. You'll hurt yourself." He reached out to grab her elbow, to guide her back to the chair. Mary stopped. She didn't flinch away, but she turned her head, right toward the sound of his boots. "Stop right there, Mr. Boone," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight. It demanded to be heard. Silas froze. His hand hung in the air. She faced him. Her clouded eyes didn't see him, but her posture was straight as a lodgepole pine. "I need to say this now," Mary said, her breathing steady. "Mr. Boone, my blindness took my sight, not my competence or my dignity. Respecting a disabled person means granting them equal right to work and autonomy, not showering them with pity. Let me do this myself." Silas stared at her. He was used to women who needed rescuing. He was used to victims. He had spent his whole life pulling people out of the dirt, expecting them to stay broken. But Mary wasn't broken. She was just in the dark. Silas lowered his hand. He stepped back. "Fair enough, ma'am. The floor is yours." Mary nodded, a slight tip of her chin. She turned back to the room. She paced off the distance from the stove to the sink. 6 steps. From the sink to the front door. 8 steps. She touched the back of the chairs, the grain of the table. She was building a map in her mind, a fortress of steps and textures. Silas watched her. He didn't interfere again. The next 2 days were a quiet war of habits. Silas lived like a man who only had himself to answer to. He was rough. He was careless. He came in from chopping wood and kicked his snowy boots off right in the middle of the room. He left his coffee tin on the edge of the table. He dropped his saddlebags wherever they fell. He didn't think about it. He just lived. Until the second evening, Mary was carrying a stack of split kindling from the pile by the door to the stove. She knew the path. She had walked it 20 times, 8 steps straight across. But Silas had left his heavy riding boots in the middle of the floor. Mary took her 5th step. Her foot hit the stiff leather. She tripped. The wood clattered across the floorboards. Mary caught herself hard against the iron stovepipe. She hissed in pain, grabbing her wrist. Silas was at the table cleaning his rifle. He dropped the rag. He jumped up. "Damn it," he muttered. He hurried over. "I'm sorry. I left them right in your path." He reached for the scattered wood. "Leave it," Mary said. She was rubbing her wrist. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set tight. "I know where the wood is now. I'll pick it up." Silas stopped. He looked at his boots lying on the floor. Then he looked at her. She knelt down. She started gathering the kindling by touch, finding the pieces one by one. Silas felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. It wasn't pity. It was realization. His carelessness wasn't just messy anymore. It was dangerous. She had memorized his house, but he was constantly changing the map. He didn't apologize again. Words were cheap on the mountain. Instead, he picked up his boots. He placed them neatly against the wall by the door. Then he walked over to the table. He moved his rifle gear to the shelf. He pushed the chairs in tight against the table. From that moment on, Silas Boone changed his code. Every tool went back to its peg. Every cup went back to its hook. If he moved a piece of furniture, he told her, he made his world predictable so she could walk freely in it. He adapted to her, not because she was weak, because she deserved the space to be strong. On the third day, the boundary was tested again. Silas was outside, repairing a busted trace chain on a harness. Mary was exploring the far corner of the cabin, a corner she hadn't mapped thoroughly yet. Silas walked in, stomping snow off his boots. He froze in the doorway. Mary was standing by the small bookshelf near his bed. Her fingers were lightly tracing the spines of his books, heavy, leather-bound books, law books, statutes of the Wyoming Territory, Pinkerton case files, the shadows of Silas's past, the ghosts of the men he had hunted, and the one innocent man he had sent to the grave. Silas felt a spike of irrational anger. His chest tightened. That shelf was his graveyard. Nobody touched it. "Those are mine," Silas said. His voice came out sharper than a whip crack. Too loud. Too harsh in the quiet cabin. Mary pulled her hand back instantly. She didn't jump, but her posture went rigid. "I apologize," she said quietly. She took a step back from the shelf. "I was just feeling the leather. I didn't mean to pry." Silas stood breathing heavily. The anger faded as fast as it came, leaving behind a hollow ache. He looked at her standing there, giving him space, respecting his boundary without question. "They're law books," Silas said. His voice was softer now, tired, from a long time ago. "A life I don't live anymore." Mary nodded slowly. "Everyone has ghosts, Mr. Boone. I won't touch them again." She walked back to the kitchen area. 6 steps. Confident. Silas looked at his books. Then he looked at Mary. They were 2 strangers carrying heavy loads, trying to share a small space, but they were figuring it out. 1 step, 1 boundary, 1 quiet respect at a time. The knock on the door came 5 days later. It was loud, heavy knuckles against thick pine. Silas set down his coffee cup. He glanced at Mary, who was sitting by the fire, knitting a woolen scarf by touch. Her needles didn't miss a beat. Silas walked to the door. He unlatched it and pulled it open. Sheriff Clayton Briggs stood on the porch. He was covered in snow, his horse tied to the post behind him. The man looked bone-tired. He wiped the frost from his mustache and let out a heavy breath. "Morning, Silas," Briggs said. His eyes flicked past Silas, into the cabin. They landed on Mary. "Can I come in? It's colder than a witch's heart out here." Silas didn't smile. He stepped aside. "Make it quick, Clayton." Briggs walked in. He took off his hat and nodded awkwardly toward Mary. "Morning, Miss Mary. Good to see you safe." Mary didn't stop knitting. "Sheriff." Briggs walked over to the stove. He held his numb hands over the iron. He didn't look comfortable. He looked like a man carrying bad news in his pocket. Silas leaned against the doorframe. He crossed his arms. "Spit it out. You didn't ride 2 hours up a frozen mountain just to warm your hands." Briggs sighed. He turned his back to the fire and faced Silas. "It's the Whitmores," Briggs said heavily. "Old man Whitmore came into my office yesterday. He was shouting mad. Said you kidnapped his niece. Said he's going to the territorial judge to have you arrested." Silas scoffed. A harsh, dry sound. "Let him try. I rode into town and offered her a job. She accepted. She rode out with me on her own accord. No law against hiring a willing hand." "He's her legal guardian, Silas," Briggs countered. "At least, he claims to be since her father passed. He's filing papers. And that ain't all." Briggs paused. He looked at the floorboards, ashamed of what he had to say next. "He bought up the debt on this mountain, Silas. The bank sold your note to the Whitmore family. He owns your debt now. He is pushing for immediate foreclosure. Says, if you don't bring the girl back down by the end of the week, he's taking the mountain and kicking you out into the snow." Silas pushed off the doorframe. His blood ran hot. His fists clenched at his sides. "He forced her to sell matches in a blizzard, Clayton." Silas growled, taking a step toward the lawman. "He was going to let her freeze to death to break her spirit. And you're telling me the law is on his side?" Briggs looked up. His eyes were sad, but his voice was firm. He didn't back down. "Do you think I want to see a blind woman abused?" Briggs asked, his voice thick with frustration. "The law was written to protect the property of rich men, Silas, not the lives of the vulnerable. But human decency won't let me look the other way. I'm trying to find a legal loophole to help you both. I came up here to warn you. You need to be ready. He's coming for the land, and he's coming for her." Mary stopped knitting. The rhythmic click of her needles ceased. "He doesn't care about me," Mary said. Her voice was calm. Too calm for a woman being hunted. "He only cares about the paper I refuse to sign. The paper that gives him total control over my father's estate." Briggs nodded, though she couldn't see it. "He's a greedy man, Miss Mary, but right now, he's got the courts in his pocket." "Let him come," Silas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "I'll be waiting on the porch with my Winchester." "Don't be a fool, Boone," Briggs warned, stepping toward the door. "You shoot a man over property, you'll swing from a rope. And then who protects her? Use your head. Find a legal way out of this." Briggs put his hat back on. He looked between the two of them one last time. "You have a week. May God be with you both." The sheriff walked out into the cold. Silas shut the door. The heavy click of the latch echoed in the quiet room. They were under siege. The silence stretched out. Silas looked at Mary. He expected her to pack her things, to offer to leave so he wouldn't lose his cabin. Instead, Mary picked up her knitting needles. Click, clack. "We need to secure the barn," she said evenly. "The wind is shifting. There's another storm coming. A bad one." Silas frowned. He walked to the window. The sky was turning a sickly, bruised gray. The temperature was dropping fast. She was right. The herd is still in the lower pasture, Silas said. I need to drive them up to the barn before the whiteout hits. He grabbed his heavy coat and his thick leather gloves. He pulled his hat down low over his eyes. I'm going with you, Mary said. She set her knitting down and stood up. Silas paused at the door. He looked at her frail frame. No, absolutely not. You'll freeze out there, Mary. And if the snow kicks up, I won't be able to keep an eye on you. Mary walked toward the door. She reached out and grabbed her own heavy wool coat from the peg. It's a half-mile to the lower pasture, Mary said, slipping her arms into the sleeves. You have 20 head of cattle. In a whiteout, you won't be able to see them. They'll scatter. You need 2 people to drive a herd. And I know how to herd cattle. You can't see the cattle, Silas argued, his voice rising in frustration. Mary faced him. She tied her scarf tightly around her neck. I don't need to see them to hear them breathing. I don't need to see them to hear the snow crunch under their hooves. If the whiteout blinds you, Mr. Boone, we will be equals. You take me with you or you lose your herd. Silas stared at her. He hated that she made sense. He hated that she was right. Stay close to my horse, Silas muttered. If you lose the rope, you drop to the ground and stay put. Understand? I understand, she said. Walked out into the teeth of the storm. It hit them like a physical blow. The wind knocked the breath from Silas's lungs. The snow was falling so fast and thick that the world disappeared. It was a complete whiteout. No sky, no ground, just a swirling, screaming vortex of ice. Silas led his horse, holding a long lead rope. Mary held the other end. She walked 10 paces behind him. They reached the lower pasture. Or at least, Silas thought it was the lower pasture. He couldn't see past his horse's nose. He strained his eyes against the driving snow. Nothing. Just white noise. I can't see them. Silas shouted over the wind. Panic began to grip his chest. If they lost the herd, they lost their livelihood. They would starve before spring. Suddenly, Mary jerked the rope, hard. Silas turned. He couldn't see her face, just the dark shape of her coat through the blizzard. She was pointing to the left, toward a grove of thick pines that Silas knew was blind to his eyes. Over there, Mary yelled. 50 yards. They're huddled together. Silas squinted. He saw nothing.
Are you sure?
I can smell the wet hair, she shouted back. I can hear the calves bleating. They're frightened. We need to move them now. Silas trusted her. He had no other choice. He swung his horse to the left. He waded through the deep drifts. Suddenly, a dark mass appeared in the white. The herd. They were clumped together under the trees, shivering and frightened. Silas spurred his horse. He started shouting, waving his hat to get them moving. The cattle balked. They didn't want to step into the howling wind. Then, Mary's voice cut through the storm. It wasn't a shout. It was a sharp, piercing whistle, followed by a specific clicking sound with her tongue, a sound farmers used, a sound cattle knew. She walked forward, completely blind, but stepping with absolute certainty. She moved to the right flank of the herd. She clapped her hands and whistled again. The lad cow turned its head toward her. Mary didn't flinch. She kept clapping, keeping rhythm, giving them a sound to follow in the blinding white. Move, Silas hollered, falling in on the left flank. The herd broke from the trees. They started trudging through the snow, following the steady, rhythmic sound of Mary's clapping and whistling. Silas was blinded by the snow. The wind froze his eyelashes shut. He was lost on his own mountain. But Mary wasn't lost. She didn't rely on the treacherous, vanishing landscape. She relied on the steady slope of the ground beneath her boots. She relied on the wind hitting her right cheek, telling her they were walking straight toward the barn. She led the herd, and she led him. They drove all 20 head into the heavy timber barn. Silas slammed the heavy wooden doors shut. He threw the iron bar into place. The sudden silence inside the barn was deafening. The smell of sweet hay and warm animal bodies filled the air. Silas leaned against the door, panting. His lungs burned. His face was numb. He looked across the dim barn. Mary was standing by the stalls. She was brushing the snow from her coat. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't terrified. She was calm. She was in her element. Silas walked over to her. He stopped a few feet away. "You guided us back?" Silas said. His voice was hoarse, full of awe. "I couldn't see a damn thing out there. I was blind." Mary stopped brushing her coat. She turned her face toward him. The faint light from the lantern caught the sharp, beautiful lines of her jaw. "The world is built for people with eyes, Mr. Boone," Mary said softly. "But the storm strips all that away. In the dark, we are all equal. You just had to trust that I knew the way." Silas looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't a fragile thing to be protected. She was a survivor, a partner. And as the storm raged outside, trying to tear the mountain apart, Silas realized he wasn't facing the Whitmores alone. He had the strongest person he had ever met standing right beside him. The mountain was quiet, too quiet. Silas woke with a start. The fire had burned down to glowing red embers. The cabin was freezing. He swung his legs out of bed. His bare feet hit the cold floorboards. He walked into the main room to throw another log on the grate. That was when he noticed the front door. It was unlatched, just a crack. A sliver of moonlight cut across the floor. Silas frowned. He reached for his rifle. He pushed the door open. The freezing night air hit him like a physical blow. He stepped out onto the porch. He didn't see wolves. He didn't see Whitmore's men. He saw Mary. She was 50 yards away, out in the deep snow. She wore her heavy coat, her breath rising in white plumes under the pale moon. She was kneeling at the base of the massive old pine tree, the one that stood like a sentinel at the edge of the clearing. Silas gripped the porch rail. She was digging, frantically. Using her bare, gloved hands and a piece of broken branch to scrape away the frozen earth and ice, he started to step off the porch, to stop her, to ask her what she was doing out in the freezing cold at 3 in the morning. But he stopped. She wasn't wandering. She wasn't lost. She had walked straight to that tree. She knew exactly where it was. Silas stepped back into the shadows. He watched her for 10 minutes. She eventually stopped. She patted the dirt back into place, stood up, and started the slow, measured walk back to the cabin. Silas slipped inside. He got back into bed. He closed his eyes, but he didn't sleep. The next morning, the sky was a hard, clear blue. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world buried in white. Silas decided to clean out the attached storage shed. It was a chore he had put off for months. The roof leaked. The floorboards were rotting. He started moving old sacks of feed, rusted plows, broken harnesses. In the back corner, the floorboards were soft. Silas pried one up with an iron crowbar. Underneath, nestled in the dry dirt between the floor joists, was a small, dusty canvas sack. Silas pulled it out. It was light. He untied the rotting leather string. He reached inside and pulled out a book. It was a school book, a primer on American history. The leather cover was cracked and dry. Silas opened it. On the inside cover, written in careful, looping cursive, was a name. Mary Caldwell. Age 10. Silas stopped breathing. He stared at the ink. It was faded, brown with age. He looked down at the floorboards. He looked at the walls of the shed. Then he looked out the small, dirty window toward the cabin, toward the woman sitting by his fire. She didn't just wander up this mountain. This wasn't a random sanctuary. This was her home. The realization hit him hard. His chest felt tight. He had bought this land off a bank claim 3 years ago. The deed had a corporate name on it. He never asked about the families before. Silas put the book in his coat pocket. He didn't go back into the cabin. He saddled his roan. "I'm going to town," Silas shouted through the door. "Stay inside." The ride to Coldwater was fast. Silas pushed the horse hard through the drifts. He didn't stop at the general store. He didn't stop at the sheriff's office. He went straight to the edge of town, to Widow Martha Higgins' boarding house. Martha was 60. She had a face like a dried apple and eyes that missed nothing. She had lived in Coldwater since it was just 3/10 and a dirt road. She knew the dirt on every soul in the county. Silas knocked. Martha opened the door. She took one look at his face, stepped aside, and pointed to the kitchen. She poured him a mug of black coffee. Silas set the schoolbook on the table. Martha looked at it. She closed her eyes and let out a long, slow sigh. "I wondered when you'd figure it out," Martha said. She sat down heavily across from him. "Tell me," Silas said. His voice was flat, dangerous. "Arthur Caldwell built that cabin," Martha said quietly. "Mary's father. He died a few months back. He left the land to Mary. It's the only thing of value she has left in this world." "Then why does the bank hold the note?" Silas asked. "Why does Whitmore claim he owns it?" Martha's eyes flashed with anger. "Because Whitmore is a thief. When Arthur died, Whitmore manipulated the town judge, claimed Mary was unfit to manage her own affairs because of her blindness. He got himself appointed as her legal guardian. But Mary isn't stupid. She refused to sign over the deed to the mountain property." Silas leaned forward. "So he threw her in the snow. He didn't just want her frozen, Silas," Martha said, her voice shaking with righteous fury. "He wanted her broken. He wanted her desperate enough to sign." Martha slammed her hand down on the table. "Listen to me, Silas Boone," Martha said, her voice turning hard and clear. "A piece of paper is just a piece of paper. But when you strip away a woman's right to own property, to fight for her own inheritance, you strip away her humanity. That is what Whitmore is doing. He isn't just stealing dirt. He is turning a human being into a legal ghost. He is denying her equal right to exist under the law. And that is a sin worse than robbery." Silas stared at his coffee. The pieces clicked into place. "The pine tree," Silas muttered. "The old pine in the clearing." Martha nodded slowly. "Arthur buried something under that tree before he died. He told Mary about it. A wooden lockbox. It holds the original land patents, documents that prove Whitmore's guardianship claims are fraudulent. Without that box, Mary has nothing. She didn't ride up that mountain to hide. Silas, she rode up there to fight." Silas stood up. He left a silver dollar on the table. He rode back up the mountain. The sun was dipping low, casting long, purple shadows across the snow. He walked into the cabin. Mary was at the table, peeling potatoes by touch. Her hands moved swiftly, the knife paring away the skin in perfect, continuous ribbons. Silas took off his coat. He looked at her. He knew her secret. He knew she owned the ground he was standing on. He knew she was using him to get to her father's box. He walked over to the fire. He stoked the embers. "Did you get what you needed in town?" Mary asked. Her voice was calm, unreadable. Silas looked at the flames. He could demand answers. He could throw the schoolbook on the table. He could force her to confess. But he remembered Martha's words. He remembered Whitmore dragging her out into the snow, trying to force her will to break. "No," Silas thought. "I won't be another man trying to back her into a corner." Silas turned around. He looked at her. "Yes, ma'am," Silas said softly. "I got exactly what I needed." He chose silence. He gave her the space to keep her secret, because he knew now that giving her the freedom to choose when to speak was the only way to earn her trust. The trouble started just before dawn. Silas was in the barn, pitching hay into the stalls. The air was thick with the smell of manure and damp wool. He heard a low, rattling groan. He dropped the pitchfork. He hurried down the aisle to the last stall. It was the red heifer. She was down on her side in the straw. Her sides were heaving. White foam bubbled at the corners of her mouth. Her eyes were rolled back, showing the whites. "Damn it," Silas hissed. He dropped to his knees. He ran his hands over her flank. Burning hot. Her breathing was ragged, catching in her throat like a rusty saw. It was milk fever, or maybe something worse. Silas had seen cows go down like this. Once they hit the ground, they rarely got back up. The town veterinarian was 10 miles away. Through 3 feet of fresh snow, the heavy barn doors creaked open. Mary stepped inside. She held her walking stick in one hand, a small woven basket over her arm. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight down the aisle, her ears tracking the ragged breathing of the dying cow. She stopped at the stall door. "It's the red heifer," Mary said. It wasn't a question. "She's down," Silas said, wiping at some sweat from his forehead despite the cold. "Breathing's bad. Fever's high. I don't think she'll make it to noon." Mary unlatched the stall door. She stepped in. "Don't," Silas warned, reaching for her. "She's thrashing. She'll kick you." "Hush," Mary said sharply. She knelt in the straw, right near the heavy, kicking hooves of the panicked animal. She reached out with both hands. She didn't flinch as the cow tossed its heavy head. Mary placed her bare palms on the heifer's chest. She closed her unseeing eyes. She turned her head slightly, pressing her ear close to the cow's ribs. She stayed like that for a full minute, listening, feeling. "Her lungs are filling with fluid," Mary said, sitting back. Her voice was entirely calm, pragmatic. "It's not milk fever. It's mountain lung." The dampness got into her chest. "Can you fix it?" Silas asked. He felt helpless, a man who could shoot a coin out of the air at 50 paces, entirely useless to save a dying animal. "I can," Mary said. She stood up. She pointed a finger toward the barn door. "Listen to me closely, Mr. Boone. You need to go down to the creek bank, where the water doesn't freeze under the overhang. Dig through the snow." Silas stood up. "What am I looking for?" "A root," Mary said rapidly. "The plant is dead on top, but the leaves are still there under the snow. They are sharp, jagged, like the edge of a saw. The stem feels hairy. Pull up the root. Break it in half. It will smell intensely like black licorice and damp earth. I need 3 of them. Bring them to the kitchen." Silas didn't argue. He didn't question her. He ran. He waded through the waist-deep snow down to the creek. His hands went numb as he dug furiously through the frozen crust. He found leaves, smooth ones, round ones. Finally, his fingers snagged on something sharp, jagged edges. He yanked the plant out of the frozen mud. He snapped the thick brown root in half. The pungent, unmistakable smell of black licorice hit his nose. He grabbed 3 more and sprinted back to the cabin. When he burst through the door, Mary already had a pot of water boiling on the stove. "I have them," Silas panted. He slammed the muddy roots on the table. "Wash them. Crush them with the flat of your knife," Mary ordered. "Then put them in the water." They worked together, a seamless machine. Silas acted as her eyes and muscle. She acted as the brain. They boiled the root down into a thick, dark syrup. Silas poured it into a glass bottle. They hurried back to the barn. The heifer was barely moving now, just shallow, shuddering gasps. Silas straddled the cow's neck, holding her heavy head still. Mary knelt in the filth. She found the corner of the cow's mouth with her fingers. She slid the glass neck of the bottle in, tipping it slowly, stroking the animal's throat to force her to swallow. Easy now, Mary murmured. Her voice was a soft, rhythmic hum. Swallow it down. That's it. They sat in the freezing barn for 2 hours. Silas didn't move. He watched Mary. Her hands never left the cow's flank. She kept a constant, soothing rhythm. Slowly, the ragged breathing eased. The rattling in the chest faded. The cow let out a long, clear exhale. She blinked. Then, with a massive heave, she rolled onto her chest. Silas let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He sat back in the straw, wiping a muddy hand across his face. I'll be damned, Silas whispered. Mary smiled. It was a small thing, but it lit up the dim barn. She wiped her hands on an old rag. Silas looked at her. Where did you learn to do that? From my father, Mary said quietly, and from necessity. When I lost my sight, I had to learn the world again. I learned the smell of every herb, the texture of every bark. People think when you go blind, your world shrinks. But it doesn't. It just gets deeper. She turned toward him. Healing isn't just about keeping a body breathing, Mr. Boone, Mary said. The words rang clear and steady in the quiet barn. Whether it is an animal or a person, when we care for them at their weakest, that is how we restore dignity to the lives the world has thrown away. True compassion doesn't look at someone's broken parts. It looks at their worth. It acknowledges their absolute right to exist and fights to protect it. Silas listened. He felt the truth of her words settle deep in his bones. Later that night, the wind picked up again. The cabin was warm. The fire crackled in the hearth. Silas was sitting in his armchair. Mary was on the rug, her back resting against the heavy stones of the fireplace. The oil lamp flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Mary, Silas said softly. It was the first time he used her first name without a title. She turned her head. Yes, Silas? Do you ever fear the dark? He asked. The question had been gnawing at him since he brought her up the mountain. When you're alone, when the wind is howling. Does it scare you? Not knowing what's standing in front of you. Mary was quiet for a long moment. She reached out and held her hands up toward the fire, feeling the heat on her palms. I don't live in the dark, Silas, Mary said softly. What do you mean? I live in sound. I live in temperature. I live in memory. She lowered her hands. You rely on your eyes. You think what you see is the entire world. But close your eyes for a moment. Do it. Silas hesitated. Then he closed his eyes. Now, Mary said. Her voice was rhythmic, hypnotic. Tell me, what is in this room? Nothing but black, Silas said. No. Listen, Mary instructed. Don't look for light. Listen for life. Tell me what you feel. Silas sat still. The visual world faded. He felt a cold draft seeping in under the front door, hitting his left ankle. He heard the deep, resonant pop of pine sap exploding in the fire. He smelled the faint metallic tang of the gun oil on his hands, mixed with the sweet scent of the dried lavender Mary kept in her pockets. He heard the steady, calm rhythm of her breathing, just 6 feet away. I hear the fire, Silas whispered. I feel the cold from the door. I smell the wood. You see, Silas, Mary said, her voice rich with conviction. The world is entirely equal when the lights go out. Sight is just a convenience. It is not the measure of a person's capability or their value. We navigate the dark differently, but we both arrive at the same truth. Silas opened his eyes. He looked at her sitting there, serene, powerful. You're not in the dark at all, are you? Silas asked quietly. Mary smiled. No, Silas, I see perfectly fine. I just do it without my eyes. The mountain didn't care about paper, but men did. The rider came just past noon. It wasn't the sheriff this time. It was a deputy, a young kid with terrified eyes and a horse covered in frozen sweat. Silas stepped off the porch. He didn't say a word. He just held out his hand. The kid handed over a heavy, yellow envelope. The wax seal on the back was stamped with the Coldwater Bank crest. The deputy didn't linger. He wheeled his horse around and rode back down the trail, as fast as the snow would allow. Silas stood in the freezing wind. He cracked the wax. He didn't need to read the fine print. The bold letters at the top said enough. Notice of immediate foreclosure. Order to vacate. Whitmore had done it. He hadn't just bought the debt. He had weaponized it. The letter stated, Silas had 3 days to surrender the property. 3 days to pack up his life and walk away into the dead of winter. If he refused, the federal marshals would come. Silas crumpled the thick paper in his leather glove. His jaw locked. He looked at the cabin. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney. Inside that warm room was a blind woman who had brought his dead home back to life. A woman who belonged to this mountain more than he ever did. He shoved the crushed letter into his coat pocket. He walked back inside. Mary was at the table. She was sorting dried beans into a tin pot. Her fingers moved with that impossible, steady rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Who was it? Mary asked. She didn't turn around. She just listened to his heavy footsteps. Deputy, Silas said. His voice was hollow. Flat. Mary stopped sorting. Her hands hovered over the tin. What did he bring? Silas didn't answer right away. He walked over to his heavy oak trunk at the foot of the bed. He opened it. He reached multiple blankets and pulled out the old, cracked school book he had found in the shed. He walked back to the table. He tossed the book onto the wood. It landed with a heavy, dead thud. Mary flinched, just a fraction of an inch. But Silas saw it. He brought a letter, Silas said, from the bank. Whitmore called the note. I have 3 days to leave. Mary's breath hitched. She lowered her hands slowly, resting them on the edge of the table. I am sorry, Silas. He's doing this to punish you. For taking me. No, Silas said. He stepped closer to the table. He looked down at her. He's doing this because he knows what you came here to find. Isn't that right, Mary Caldwell? The name hung in the air, heavy as lead. Mary froze. The color drained from her face. She didn't speak. She didn't try to deny it. Silas pointed at the book, even though she couldn't see it. I found your school primer under the floorboards in the shed. I went down to see Martha Higgins. I know about your father. I know about the box buried under the old pine. The one you were digging for 2 nights ago. The silence in the cabin was suffocating. The only sound was the hiss of the wind slipping under the door. Mary finally moved. She stood up. She didn't back away. She turned her face toward him, her sightless eyes fixed on where his voice came from. Yes, Mary said softly. This was my father's land. The box under the tree holds the original land patents. Documents that prove my uncle's guardianship is a fraud. With that box, I can destroy him in court. I can take everything back. Silas felt a bitter taste in his mouth. He felt like a fool, a rough, lonely fool who had let his guard down. So, I was just a ride up the mountain, Silas said. His voice was dangerously quiet. A convenient shield. You sat by my fire, ate my food, and let me think I was saving you. All while you were planning to dig up your deed and pull the rug out from under me. That is not true, Mary shot back. Her voice rose. The calm facade cracked. Yes, I planned to use you to get up here. I had no choice. My uncle was going to let me freeze to death if I didn't sign my life away to him. You were my only way out. She took a step toward him. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. But things changed, Silas, she pleaded, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't expect you. I expected a harsh, greedy squatter. I expected a man I could steal from and leave behind without a second thought. But then you rearranged your boots so I wouldn't fall. You let me save the heifer. You gave me space. You gave me respect. She reached out, her hand finding the edge of the table, grounding herself. I found the box 2 nights ago, Mary confessed, her voice dropping to a whisper. But I didn't take it. I buried it back in the dirt. Because I realized that if I take this land back, I take your home, and I won't do that. I won't evict a good man just to save myself. I chose to stay quiet, to protect you. Silas stared at her. His chest heaved. The anger inside him didn't vanish. It morphed. It burned hotter. He didn't want her protection. He didn't want her sacrifice. He stepped around the table. He stopped right in front of her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. You think you did me a favor? Silas asked, his voice rough as gravel. You think hiding the truth was an act of kindness? Mary swallowed hard. I didn't want to hurt you, Silas. You don't get to make that choice for me, Silas said firmly. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The weight of his words filled the room. He looked at her, willing her to understand. You hid this from me because you were afraid I'd be hurt, or that I'd throw you out, Silas said, his voice steady and resolute. But Mary, the truth, no matter how brutal, is a fundamental right every human being deserves. Hiding the truth in the name of kindness is just stripping away another person's right to choose. It is treating me like a child who can't handle the dark. I am a grown man. I own my choices, and you stole my right to choose the moment you decided to lie to me. Mary flinched as if he had struck her. She bowed her head. The fight drained out of her. You're right, she whispered. Her voice broke. I was a coward. I treated you the way my uncle treats me, like someone who doesn't have the right to know their own fate. Silas closed his eyes. The anger left him, leaving a hollow, aching emptiness behind. He ran a hand over his tired face. I don't care about the land, Mary, Silas said quietly. I bought this dirt with blood money anyway, but I cared that you trusted me, and you didn't. Mary lifted her head. A single tear escaped her clouded eye, tracing a slow path down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. I trust you, Silas, she said softly, more than anyone in this world. But you're right. Trust requires truth, and I failed you. She turned away from him. She walked toward the bedroom. 6 steady paces. Silas watched her go. He wanted to reach out. He wanted to pull her back. To tell her it was all right. To tell her they would fight Whitmore together. But a man's pride is a heavy anchor, and Silas carried his for too long. He stood rooted to the floorboards. A few minutes later, Mary emerged from the bedroom. She was wearing her heavy wool coat. Her scarf was wrapped tightly around her neck. In her hand, she carried the small canvas travel bag she had brought with her from town. Silas felt his stomach drop. What are you doing? I am giving you back your right to choose, Mary said. She walked past the table, heading straight for the front door. My uncle doesn't want your land, Silas. He just wants to hurt you because you have me. If I am not here, he has no reason to pursue the foreclosure. He'll drop the banknote. You can keep your mountain. You can't go out there, Silas said. He stepped in front of the door, blocking her path. It's freezing. You'll die on the trail. Mary stopped. She tilted her chin up, facing him. I survived a blizzard before I met you, Mr. Boone, Mary said. Her voice was devoid of malice, but it was hard as iron. I am going to walk out that door. I am going to dig up my father's box. And I am going to walk down this mountain to Widow Martha's house. I won't let you, Silas growled. You will, Mary countered. Because if you stop me by force, you are no better than my uncle. You would be keeping me here against my will. You told me respect means autonomy. This is my choice. Respect it. Silas gritted his teeth. His jaw ached from the tension. She was using his own code against him. She was demanding the dignity he had promised her. Slowly, agonizingly, Silas stepped aside. He reached out and unlatched the heavy wooden door. The wind howled as it swung open, blowing a dusting of snow across the floorboards. Mary didn't hesitate. She stepped out onto the porch. "I'll saddle the horse," Silas said, his voice cracking. "I'll ride you down." "No," Mary said. She didn't turn back. "If you ride into town with me, Whitmore's men will shoot you on sight. I have to do this alone. It's the only way to separate your name from mine." She walked off the porch. Her boots crunched in the deep snow. Silas stood in the doorway. The freezing wind tore at his clothes, but he couldn't feel it. He felt entirely numb. He watched her walk to the old pine tree. He watched her drop to her knees and dig through the snow. He watched her pull a small, dark wooden box from the frozen earth. She stood up. She tucked the box under her arm. She didn't look back toward the cabin. She just raised her walking stick and started the long, treacherous descent down the mountain. Silas stood in the open doorway until she was nothing but a dark speck against the blinding white snow, until she vanished completely into the timberline. The cabin was silent again. Silas walked over to the fire. He picked up the heavy iron poker. He stared at the glowing embers. He had his mountain. He had his quiet. He had his safety. He swung the iron poker, smashing the embers into a shower of sparks. He had never felt so damned empty in his entire life. The walk down the mountain nearly killed her. Mary Caldwell didn't see the snow, but she felt it. It was a physical wall. It pushed against her chest. It grabbed at her boots. By the time she reached the edge of Coldwater, her hands were numb. Her face felt like cracked glass. But she didn't drop the wooden box. She held it tight against her ribs. She found Widow Martha S. boarding house by the smell of wood smoke and stale coffee. She stumbled up the porch steps. She found the door handle. She didn't knock. She just turned it and fell inside. Martha Higgins was sweeping the hallway. She dropped her broom. "Lord Almighty," Martha gasped. She rushed over. She hauled Mary off the floorboards. She dragged her into the kitchen and pushed her into a chair right beside the cast-iron stove. Martha stripped off Mary's frozen coat. She wrapped her in a thick wool quilt. She pressed a mug of boiling tea into her shaking hands. Mary couldn't speak. Her teeth chattered too hard. Martha saw the dark wooden box sitting on Mary S. lap. She recognized it instantly. Martha pulled up a chair. She sat down. She let Mary thaw in the quiet kitchen. The only sound was the crackle of the stove and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. An hour passed. Mary finally stopped shaking. "You found it," Martha said quietly. Mary ran her fingers over the smooth, cold wood of the box. "I found it, but I can't read what's inside. And I left Silas alone to face my uncle, Wrath." Martha sighed. A long, tired sound. "Boone can handle himself. He has survived worse men than your uncle. But you, Mary, you need to know why you're holding that box." Mary turned her face toward the older woman. "I know why. To prove Whitmore is a fraud. To take my land back." "That S part of it," Martha said. "But you need to know why your father let Whitmore take control in the first place. You always thought Arthur was just weak, that he gave up." "Didn't he?" Mary asked. Her voice was bitter. "No," Martha said softly. "He was crushed by his own guilt, and Whitmore knew exactly how to use it." Mary frowned. "Guilt? For what?" Martha leaned forward. She rested her hand on Mary's knee. "The carriage accident, Mary," Martha said. 9 years ago. The one that took your sight." Mary stiffened. "The axle broke. The horses bolted. It was an accident." "It was a borrowed carriage," Martha corrected gently. "Arthur knew the axle was cracked. The blacksmith told him not to drive it. But Arthur was in a hurry. He wanted to get you to Denver for your teaching interview, on time. He thought it would hold. He gambled. And you paid the price. Mary sat perfectly still. The tea in her mug stopped rippling. He never forgave himself, Martha continued. When you went blind, Arthur died inside. Whitmore saw that. When Arthur got sick last year, Whitmore cornered him. He told Arthur that a blind woman couldn't survive alone on a mountain. He told Arthur that if he didn't sign over legal guardianship, Whitmore would legally contest the estate, drag you through the mud, and leave you penniless in the streets. A tear slipped from Mary's clouded eye. Arthur signed the guardianship papers to protect you, Martha said. He thought he was securing your future, but he was just handing you to a wolf. He realized it too late. That's why he buried the original land patents. The ones that prove the mountain belongs to you, free and clear, regardless of guardianship. He hid them from Whitmore. Mary gripped the box. Her knuckles turned white. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He had just been bleeding from a wound nobody could see. Up on the mountain, the wind howled around Silas Boone's cabin. It sounded different now. It didn't sound like nature. It sounded like an empty room. Silas paced the floorboards, 5 steps to the window, 5 steps back to the hearth. The fire was roaring, but he was freezing. He looked at the neat row of kindling Mary had stacked by the stove. He looked at the armchair where she sat and knitted. He looked at the heavy door she had walked out of 3 hours ago. He had let her walk. He had stood there, wrapped in his wounded pride, and watched a blind woman walk into a frozen wasteland. He told himself he was respecting her autonomy. He told himself he was honoring her choice. Bullshit, Silas said to the empty room. He wasn't respecting her. He was punishing her. He was punishing her for keeping a secret, because he was terrified of how much he had started to care. He had used her lie as an excuse to build his walls back up. A man's pride is a heavy anchor. It will drag him straight to the bottom of the ocean if he doesn't cut the rope. Silas grabbed his coat. He grabbed his gun belt. He strapped the heavy Colt to his hip. He didn't care about the foreclosure. He didn't care about the bank, or Whitmore, or the land. He only cared that Mary was out there, and she was fighting a war in the dark. He ran to the barn. He threw the heavy saddle onto the roan gelding. He didn't bother with the trails. He pointed the horse straight down the slope. The ride was reckless, suicidal. The horse slid on the ice, fighting for footing. Pine branches whipped Silas across the face, drawing blood. He didn't slow down. He pushed the horse harder. He hit the edge of town just as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, painting the sky in violent shades of red and bruised purple. He didn't stop at the sheriff's office. He rode straight to Widow Martha's boarding house. He swung down from the saddle. He took the porch steps 2 at a time. He didn't knock. He pushed the front door open. "Mary," Silas shouted. Martha stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She didn't look surprised. "Keep your voice down, Boone," Martha scolded. "This is a respectable house." Silas ignored her. He pushed past her into the kitchen. Mary was sitting by the stove. The quilt was still wrapped around her shoulders. The wooden box sat on the table. She turned her head instantly. "Silas?" Silas stopped. His chest heaved. He looked at her pale face. He looked at her trembling hands. The anger that had fueled him for the past 4 hours evaporated. It vanished completely. He walked over to the table. He took off his hat. "I shouldn't have let you walk out that door," Silas said. His voice was ragged, stripped bare. Mary shook her head. "I shouldn't have lied to you in the first place." Silas pulled out a chair. He sat down heavily across from her. I'm a stubborn man, Mary, Silas said slowly. I see the world in black and white. Good guys and bad guys. Outlaws and victims. I forgot that most people are just somewhere in the middle, trying to survive. You did what you had to do. You were fighting for your life. Mary reached across the table. She found his hand. Her fingers were cold. He gripped them gently. I came down here to give you your mountain back, Silas, Mary said softly. I don't want the mountain if you're not on it, Silas replied. He didn't hesitate. It was the truest thing he had ever said. Mary smiled, a real, genuine smile. It broke the tension in the room like sunlight, piercing a storm cloud. She let go of his hand. She pulled the wooden box closer. I have the box, Mary said. The lock is rusted shut. I can't break it. Silas pulled his hunting knife from his belt. Let me. He took the box. He wedged the heavy steel blade under the rusted iron hasp. He twisted his wrist. With a sharp crack, the lock gave way. Silas opened the lid. The smell of old paper and dried cedar drifted into the air. He reached inside. He pulled out a thick stack of folded parchment. These are the land patents, Silas said, unfolding the heavy paper. Official territorial seal, signed by the governor. Arthur Caldwell is the sole owner. There's a clause here. The property passes directly to his heir. Irrevocable. Whitmore's guardianship papers can't touch this dirt. He has no legal right to sell it to the bank. Mary let out a long, shaky breath. It's over. We have him. There's something else, Silas said. He reached back into the box. Underneath the legal documents was a small stack of letters. They were tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting on the envelopes was erratic, shaky. Letters, Silas said, addressed to you. Mary froze. From my father? Yes. Mary swallowed hard. Read them, please. I need to hear his voice. Silas untied the ribbon. He opened the first envelope. The paper was brittle. He cleared his throat. He started to read. Arthur S. words filled the quiet kitchen. He wrote about the weather. He wrote about the farm. He wrote about how quiet the house felt without her. Then, Silas opened the last letter. It was dated just 2 weeks before Arthur died. Silas read it. His voice slowed down. The words carried a heavy, devastating weight. My dearest Mary, Silas read, his voice dropping an octave. By the time you find this box, I will be gone, and you will likely hate me. You have every right to. I have made a terrible mess of things. Whitmore is circling like a vulture. He threatened to throw you to the streets if I didn't give him legal control. Mary closed her eyes. I signed the papers, Mary, Silas read, his voice steady. I thought I was protecting you. But the truth is, I was just too weak to fight him. My strength left me the day that carriage crashed, the day the darkness took your eyes. I knew the axle was broken. I gambled with your life, and you lost. I have carried that sin in silence every day since. Mary let out a quiet sob. She covered her mouth with her hand. Silas paused. He looked at her. He wanted to stop reading. He didn't want to cause her more pain. Keep reading, Mary whispered. Finish it. Silas looked back at the letter. He took a breath. He read the final paragraph. The words weren't just a father-esque confession. They were a plea for absolution. I let Whitmore take control because I believed I deserved to be punished, Silas read. The words struck a chord deep inside his own chest. I believed that suffering was the only way to pay for my sins. But I was wrong. I see that now. I see what my silence has cost you. Silas paused. He looked at Mary, making sure she was listening to every single word. He read the final lines out loud, clear, unwavering. My daughter, true love isn't carrying your sins in silence and destroying yourself as punishment. True love is having the courage to face your mistakes, beg for forgiveness, and give the ones you love the power to decide their own fate. I am so sorry I hid my guilt from you. I am sorry I took away your choice. Take these deeds. Take back your life. Do not let my mistakes keep you in the dark. You are stronger than I ever was. Silas lowered the paper. The kitchen was dead silent. Mary wept. She didn't wail. She just let the tears fall, fast and silent, washing away 9 years of resentment and confusion. Silas didn't try to stop her. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just sat there. He bore witness to her grief. He let her process the truth her father had finally given her. He thought about his own guilt. He thought about the man who died in prison because of his mistake. He thought about how he had punished himself by hiding on a mountain, pushing the world away. Arthur Caldwell had done the same thing, and it had nearly destroyed his daughter. Silas folded the letter. He placed it gently into Mary's hand. He loved you, Silas said quietly. He was a flawed man, like all of us. But he loved you enough to leave you the weapon you need to fight back. Mary gripped the letter. She took a deep, shuddering breath. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. When she raised her head, the grief was gone, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. Whitmore thought my father's guilt was a weakness, Mary said. Her voice was steady again, sharp as a razor. He thought he could use it to bury me. She stood up. She reached across the table and found the thick stack of land patents. Are you ready to go to town, Mr. Boone? Mary asked. Silas stood up. He smiled, a dangerous, predatory smile. He rested his hand on the butt of his Colt. I've been ready since the day I met you, Mary Caldwell, Silas said. Let's go take back your mountain. Morning broke over Coldwater like a cracked pane of glass, cold, sharp, unforgiving. Silas Boone stepped off Widow Martha S. porch. He left his rifle inside. He didn't need it. He had his Colt on his hip and a folded stack of heavy parchment in the inside pocket of his coat. He walked down the center of the muddy, frozen street. His boots crunched on the ice, echoed off the false front buildings. Men sweeping the boardwalks stopped. They looked at him. They saw the set of his jaw, the flat, dead look in his eyes. They stepped back inside and closed their doors. Silas didn't look left or right. He walked straight to the office of Horace Vance, attorney at law. Vance was a small, nervous man. He wore suits that cost more than a rancher made in a year. He was Whitmore's pocket lawyer, the man who drew up the fraudulent guardianship papers. Silas kicked the door open. He didn't knock. The heavy wood banged against the wall. Vance jumped behind his mahogany desk, spilling ink across a fresh ledger. Boone, Vance stammered. He wiped his hands on a handkerchief. You can't just barge in here. I have clients. I have a schedule. Shut up, Horace, Silas said. He walked to the desk. He reached into his coat. Vance flinched, thinking Silas was reaching for a gun. Instead, Silas pulled out the stack of land patents. He tossed them onto the wet ink. Read them, Silas ordered. Vance swallowed hard. He adjusted his spectacles. His trembling fingers picked up the heavy parchment. He read the first line, then the second. The color drained entirely out of the lawyer's face. He looked like a man who had just seen his own gravestone. Where did you get these? Vance whispered. His voice cracked. Arthur told me these were lost in a fire. Arthur lied to protect his daughter from thieves, Silas said. These are the original deeds to the mountain, signed by the territorial governor. Irrevocable transfer to Mary Caldwell upon his death. No stipulations, no guardianship clauses. Vance dropped the papers. This complicates things. No, it simplifies them. A new voice boomed. Silas didn't turn around. He knew that pompous, gravelly voice. Elias Whitmore stood in the doorway. He wore a heavy fur coat. He looked furious. He glared at Silas, then looked at the papers on the desk. What is this nonsense, Vance? Whitmore barked, stepping into the room. I told you to send the marshals up the mountain. Why is this squatter standing in your office? Mr. Whitmore, Vance squeaked. He pointed a shaky finger at the documents. He has the original patents. Arthur didn't burn them. He buried them. The mountain belongs to Mary. Your guardianship doesn't cover inherited land deeds held in a blind trust. Whitmore's face turned the color of bruised meat. He stormed toward the desk. He snatched the papers. He read them. His breathing turned ragged. It's a forgery, Whitmore spat. I am her legal guardian. She is a blind, helpless woman. She can't own property. She can't run a ranch. The court gave her to me. The land is mine to manage. Silas moved. Fast. He grabbed Whitmore by the heavy lapels of his fur coat. He slammed the older man back against the oak wall of the office. The framed legal degrees rattled. Vance let out a terrified squeak and backed into the corner. Silas leaned in. He was inches from Whitmore's face. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. Listen to me, and listen good, Silas said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You thought her blindness made her weak. You thought you could strip her to the bone, and nobody would care. But you were wrong. Silas let go of the coat. He took a half step back. He looked between the crooked lawyer and the greedy uncle. Justice does not distinguish between the sighted and the blind, Silas stated. His words were clear, heavy, and absolute. Her property, her labor, and her freedom were stolen by cowards. We aren't begging for charity. We are demanding the absolute equality and human rights that belong to her. You used the law as a weapon to strip a woman of her dignity. But the truth is out now. If you try to enforce that fake foreclosure, if you ever come near Mary again, I will not use the courts. I will use the mountain. Whitmore rubbed his chest. He looked at the hard, unyielding steel in Silas Boone's eyes. He knew a killer when he saw one. He knew he had lost. Draft the countersuit. Horace, Silas commanded without looking at the lawyer. Revoke the guardianship. Transfer the banknote out of Whitmore's name and put it back in the bank's hands. Do it, now. Vance scrambled to his chair. He grabbed a fresh pen. Yes, yes, right away. Silas stood there for an hour. He watched the lawyer sweat. He watched the lawyer write out the official surrender of Whitmore's claims. When the ink was dry, Silas folded the new documents. He put them in his coat. He left the office without another word. He walked back to Widow Martha's boarding house. The wind had died down. The sun was pale, but it was shining. He walked into the kitchen. Mary was sitting exactly where he had left her. The empty wooden box was on the table. Martha was kneading bread dough on the counter. Silas walked over. He pulled the freshly inked papers from his coat. He placed them gently on the table, right under Mary's hands. Mary felt the crisp, stiff paper. What is this, Silas? It's a formal surrender, Silas said quietly, drafted by Vance, signed by Whitmore. It revokes his guardianship. It acknowledges your sole ownership of the mountain, and it places the debt note back with the bank. Mary's fingers trembled as she traced the edges of the paper. She had fought in the dark for so long. She had endured the freezing cold, the humiliation, the fear, and now it was resting right under her fingertips. Martha stopped kneading. She wiped a tear from her cheek with a flour-covered hand. She quietly left the kitchen, giving them the room. Mary looked up. You did this. You faced him for me. I just delivered the paper, Silas said. You're the one who found it. Silas pulled out a chair and sat down. He looked at her hands, small, scarred from the cold, stronger than iron. There's something else, Mary, Silas said. His voice was thick, hesitant. Mary tilted her head. What is it? The bank note, Silas explained. It's back with the bank, but it's still unpaid. $847. It's a heavy debt, but it's attached to the land, not to the name. He paused. He took a deep breath. The mountain is yours, Silas said. He didn't flinch. You hold the deed. You have the right to sell it. If you sell it, you can pay off the bank, and you'll have enough money to buy a nice house here in town. Or in Denver. You be safe. You'll be free. Mary was perfectly still. And what about you, Silas? If I sell the land to pay the debt, you lose your cabin. You lose your home. I'll pack my saddlebags, Silas said flatly. I survived before the cabin. I'll survive after. Mary reached across the table. She found his hand. She didn't let him pull away. You're giving it to me, Mary said, her voice full of wonder. You're giving me the power to make you homeless. It was never my power to hold, Silas answered. I bought stolen dirt. It belongs to you. You decide what happens to it. You decide what happens to me. He was entirely willing to lose everything. He had fought the battle, won the war, and now he was laying the spoils entirely at her feet. He wasn't a savior demanding gratitude. He was a man handing ultimate power back to a woman whom society had deemed helpless. Mary squeezed his hand. A slow, radiant smile spread across her face. I'm not selling my mountain, Mr. Boone, Mary said softly. But we have a barn to fix and a herd to feed. I suggest we go home. Silas felt a knot loosen in his chest, a knot that had been tight for 3 long years. He smiled back. Yes, ma'am. Let's go home. They rode back up the mountain the next morning. The sky was a heavy, bruised gray. The air tasted like iron. Another storm was rolling in off the peaks. The final, bitter breath of winter. They reached the cabin just as the first heavy flakes began to fall. Silas stabled the roan. He brought in 2 armfuls of chopped wood. He bolted the heavy door shut. By nightfall, the blizzard hit. It was a monster. The wind shrieked around the eaves. The timber walls groaned under the pressure. But inside, the fire roared in the hearth. The iron stove radiated deep, comforting heat. They were trapped, cut off from the world. But, for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. Silas sat in his armchair. He was polishing his Winchester. Mary sat on the braided rug near the fire. She was sorting through a small pile of dried herbs, her hands moving with that familiar, rhythmic grace. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, settled. But Silas had a ghost in the room, a ghost that had been pacing the floorboards since the day he brought her up here. He set the rifle down. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Mary, Silas said. The word was rough. She stopped sorting. She turned her ear toward him. I'm listening. You told me about your father, Silas started. He looked at the fire. He couldn't look at her face. You told me about the guilt he carried, how it broke him, how he punished himself. I did, Mary said quietly. I told you I was a bounty hunter, Silas continued. His voice was tight, strained. I chased men for a living. I was good at it. I didn't care about their stories. I just cared about the paper in my pocket and the silver in their hand. He swallowed hard. The memory tasted like ash. 3 years ago, a town down in Colorado, Silas said. Bank robbery, 2 guards shot dead. I got a tip on a man named Elias Thorne. The description matched. The horse matched. I tracked him down to a sod house out on the plains. I kicked the door in. I dragged him out in front of his wife and 3 kids. He swore he was innocent. They all do. Mary didn't interrupt. She just sat perfectly still, holding space for his confession. I chained him to a wagon, Silas said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I dragged him back to the territory jail, but the judge was out on circuit. Thorne sat in that damp, freezing cell for 3 months waiting for trial. He caught typhus. He died on the stone floor, choking on his own fluid. Silas closed his eyes. The heat of the fire couldn't touch the cold inside him. 2 weeks later, Silas said, the marshals caught the real bank robbers in Texas. Thorne was a dirt farmer. He just bought the wrong horse from the wrong man. I killed an innocent father for $50. The cabin was silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. That's why I came up here, Silas finally admitted. That's why I bought this cabin, to get away from people. Because I didn't trust myself to be around them. I punished myself, just like Arthur did. He braced himself. He waited for her to recoil, to tell him he was a monster, to ask him to stay away from her. Mary didn't recoil. She stood up. She walked over to him. She didn't hesitate. She reached out, her hands finding his shoulders. She slid down, kneeling on the floorboards right between his knees. She reached up. Her soft, warm hands found his face. Her thumbs gently traced the harsh, jagged scar across his cheek. Silas, Mary said. Her voice was incredibly soft, incredibly strong. Guilt is a thief. It steals your past, and it demands your future. She rested her forehead against his chest. He felt her breathing, steady, calm. You made a terrible mistake, Mary said. She didn't excuse what he did. She didn't pretend it was okay. A man died. You can never fix that. But punishing yourself on this mountain doesn't bring him back. It doesn't help his widow. It just adds another ruined life to the tragedy. She tilted her head back. She looked up at him with unseeing, beautiful eyes. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, Mary told him. Forgiveness is choosing to live anyway, to do good anyway. My father let his guilt turn him into a victim. I won't let you do the same. You are a good man, Silas Boone. You protected me when you had nothing to gain. You gave me my life back. Now, it is time to take yours back. Silas broke. The walls he had built for 3 years shattered into dust. He wrapped his thick, scarred arms around her. He buried his face in her shoulder. He wept. The harsh, silent tears of a man who had carried the world on his back for far too long. Mary held him. She stroked his hair. She anchored him in the storm. The blizzard raged for 3 days. But inside the cabin, the winter finally broke. Spring began to bloom. When the snow finally stopped falling, the sun broke over the Tetons. The world was blinding white, sparkling like crushed diamonds. They rode down into cold water together. The town was digging out. People watched them ride down the main street. The rugged, scarred mountain man. The serene, blind woman sitting tall in the saddle behind him. They didn't look like victims anymore. They looked like royalty. They walked into Sheriff Briggs' office. Briggs was at his desk. Horace Vance, the lawyer, was sitting in a chair in the corner, looking deeply uncomfortable. Morning, Silas, Miss Mary, Briggs said. He stood up and took off his hat. Vance brought the paperwork over. Everything is in order. Whitmore has left town, took the morning stage to Denver. He won't be back. Good, Silas said. Vance stood up nervously. He laid a thick stack of papers on the sheriff's desk. The deed is clear in Mary's name, Vance said quickly. But there is still the matter of the banknote, $847. The bank is demanding payment by the end of the month. Mary stepped forward. She reached into her heavy coat pocket. She pulled out a thick canvas pouch. She dropped it on the desk. It hit the wood with a heavy, metallic thud. $1,200, Mary said calmly. Gold double eagles. My teaching savings from Denver. I didn't trust the bank, so I brought it with me. Count it, Mr. Vance. Take the $847 for the debt. Draw up a receipt for the remainder. Vance's eyes widened. He scrambled to open the pouch. The gold coins spilled across the desk, gleaming in the morning light. Silas stared at her. Mary, you don't have to do that. That's your life savings. It's our land, Silas, Mary said simply. She turned toward him. She reached out and placed her hand flat on the legal documents on the desk. Mr. Vance, Sheriff Briggs, Mary said, her voice carrying through the small office. It was the voice of a schoolteacher, the voice of a woman who knew her exact worth. I want a new document drafted right now, Mary commanded. A legal partnership agreement. I want Silas Boone S. name on the deed, right next to mine. Equal shares. Equal ownership. Briggs raised his eyebrows. Vance looked bewildered. Miss Mary, are you certain? You just won this land back. Mary didn't flinch. I am certain, Mary said. She spoke the words like a vow. Between a man and a woman, the foundation of a lasting bond doesn't start with dependency, but with absolute equality. We do not owe each other debts. We share the risks, the labor, and the rewards as free and equal human beings. Silas is not my protector. He is my partner. Write it down. Silas felt his throat tighten. He looked at her. He had never seen anything so beautiful in his entire life. Vance swallowed hard. He dipped his pen in the ink. Yes, ma'am. Right away. They signed the papers. Silas signed his name with a heavy, bold hand. Mary signed hers with a careful, measured script, her fingers guiding the pen perfectly across the line. Sheriff Briggs stamped it with the territorial seal. It's done, Briggs said, smiling, for the first time in weeks. Congratulations to you both. Silas took Mary's hand. He led her out of the office, into the bright, blinding sunlight of the Coldwater Street. The air was freezing, but it smelled like melting snow and pine needles. It smelled like the mountain. Silas lifted Mary up onto the horse. He swung up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, taking the reins. She leaned back against his chest. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. They turned the horse toward the mountain trail, riding back up to the home they had finally built together. Spring came late to the Tetons. It always did. But when it arrived, it broke the mountain wide open. The ice cracked on the creek. The snowmelt rushed down the slopes, thick and loud. The ground turned to thick, black mud. And then, almost overnight, the green shoots pushed through. Silas Boone stood by the lower pasture. He was fixing a fence rail. He held the heavy iron hammer in his right hand. He swung it, a clean, solid strike. The nail drove deep into the pine. His hand didn't shake. He wasn't awake at 4 in the morning, drowning in debt and dread. He was awake at dawn because the sun was up, and there was work to do. Good work. Honest work. He wiped the sweat from his brow. He looked up toward the cabin. Mary was on the porch. She had a small trowel in her hand. She was working the dirt in the window boxes. Silas had built them for her a week ago. She didn't need to see the seeds to plant them. She felt the depth of the soil. She spaced the tiny seeds by the width of her thumb. She turned her head, down toward the pasture. She couldn't see him, but she knew exactly where he was. Silas, Mary called out. Her voice carried over the sound of the rushing creek. Someone is coming up the trail. Silas frowned. He listened. A moment later, he heard it, the squeak of a wagon wheel, the plodding of a horse. He leaned the hammer against the fence. He walked up the slope to stand beside her on the porch. A lone horse and buggy broke through the tree line. It was Widow Martha Higgins. She was wrapped in a heavy shawl, holding the reins tight. She pulled the buggy to a stop near the old pine tree. Silas stepped off the porch and helped her down. Martha, Silas said, tipping his hat. It's a long ride up here for a morning visit. I didn't come for the scenery, Boone, Martha said. She patted her dress, knocking the trail dust off. I came because the snow is finally gone, and I had a promise to keep. She reached into the buggy. She pulled out a small bundle wrapped in oiled canvas. It was tied with a piece of frayed twine. Mary stood up from her window boxes. She wiped her hands on her apron. Martha, come sit by the fire. I'll put the kettle on. I'll sit on the porch, child, Martha said. The sun feels too good to hide from. Silas pulled up two wooden chairs. They sat on the porch. The mountain air was crisp and sweet. Martha placed the canvas bundle on her lap. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Mary, and finally at Silas. There's a history to this dirt, Martha started. Her voice was quiet. It had the cadence of a storyteller. Before Arthur Caldwell bought it. Before the Whitmores ever laid eyes on it. I've lived in Coldwater a long time. I remember the people who broke this ground. Silas leaned against the porch rail. He listened. It was right after the war, Martha said. 1865. A man named Elias Beaumont came out west. He was looking for a place where nobody knew him. He bought this exact plot of land. He built the foundation of this cabin. And he didn't come alone. Martha ran her fingers over the frayed twine. He brought his wife, Martha said. Her name was Sarah. Elias was a white man. Sarah was a black woman. She was born into slavery in Georgia. Elias bought her freedom before the war even ended. They fell in love. They married in secret, and they ran as far away from the South as they could. Mary sat perfectly still. She was captivated. They built a life up here, Martha continued. They were good people, hardworking. They kept to themselves. But small towns have small minds. The law out here didn't recognize their marriage. The town council harassed them. They wouldn't sell Elias seed. They wouldn't let Sarah buy fabric in the store. Martha's voice hardened. The anger was old, but it was still sharp. Then Elias caught pneumonia, Martha said. He died in the winter of '68. Sarah buried him. Right over there, past the tree line. But the law was vicious. The territory didn't recognize a black woman's right to inherit a white man's property. They evicted her. They took the cabin Elias built for her. They threw her out with nothing but the clothes on her back. Martha untied the twine. She folded back the oiled canvas. Inside was a stack of letters, not official documents, just worn, yellowed paper. Sarah came to my boarding house, Martha said. She stayed in my kitchen for 2 weeks before she took a stagecoach to California. Before she left, she gave me these. They are letters Elias wrote to her. And letters she wrote to Elias, the ones she never got to give him. Martha picked up the letters. She reached over and placed them gently into Mary's hands. I kept them, Martha said, for 10 years. I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't want to give them to your father, Mary. He was a good man. But his heart was too heavy with his own grief. He wouldn't have understood. But you two fought the law. You fought the greed. You fought the dark. Martha leaned forward. She looked straight at Silas, then rested a hand on Mary's knee. You need to understand something about this mountain, Martha said. Her voice rang out, clear and uncompromising. It wasn't just a story. It was a lesson. This soil witnessed the cruelty of racism. It saw the gross injustice of the law. It saw decent people torn apart because society decided their love was illegal. She squeezed Mary S. knee. But in the end, it teaches us this, Martha stated. True human compassion and equality are the only things that root deeper than prejudice. They outlast the most unforgiving laws of men. Love doesn't see color. It doesn't see blindness. It doesn't see scars. It just sees the human soul. That is the lesson this land holds. Silas, you treated Mary as an absolute equal when the world told you she was broken. You both proved that dignity is a human right, not a privilege. That is why this land belongs to you, because you finally made it right. Silence settled over the porch. The only sound was the wind rustling the branches of the old pine. Mary traced the edges of the old letters. Tears pricked her eyes, not tears of sadness, tears of profound understanding. "Thank you, Martha," Mary whispered. "We will guard them." Martha stood up. She smiled, looking lighter than she had in years. "I know you will. Now I have a boarding house to run. The spring thaw brings in all sorts of drifters." Silas walked her to her buggy. He helped her up. "Take care of her, Boone," Martha said softly. "I don't need to," Silas smiled. "She takes care of herself. We just take care of each other." Martha laughed. She flicked the reins, and the buggy rolled back down the mountain. Later that afternoon, the sun began to dip behind the peaks. The sky turned a brilliant, fiery orange. Silas and Mary sat under the massive old pine tree. The same tree where Mary had dug up her father's box. The same tree that had shaded Elias and Sarah years before. Mary held the stack of letters. Silas sat close beside her. Their shoulders touched. "Read one to me," Mary said softly. Silas took a fragile letter from the stack. He unfolded it carefully. He recognized the handwriting. It was Sarah S. The letters were slightly slanted, written with deep, heavy strokes. "It S. From Sarah," Silas said. "Written to Elias." After he passed, he cleared his throat. He read the words aloud into the quiet evening air. "My dearest Elias, they tell me I have to leave our mountain tomorrow. They say, the paper says, I am nothing to you, but paper cannot erase what we built. They can take the timber, and they can take the soil, but they cannot take the respect you gave me. You looked at me, and you saw a free woman. You gave me my dignity, and because of that, I will carry our home inside me, no matter how far I walk." Silas stopped. He swallowed hard. The words echoed in his chest. Mary reached out and rested her head against his shoulder. They weren't the first to fight a war on this mountain. They were just the first ones to win it. They had inherited a legacy of fighting for the right to exist, equally and freely, on the land they loved. Night fell over the Tetons. The cabin was warm. The oil lamp burned steadily on the heavy oak table. Mary was in the armchair by the fire. She had a blank ledger on her lap. She was running a small, metal stylus over the thick paper. She was writing. Pressing the letters into the page by touch, she was recording the story of Elias and Sarah, so it wouldn't be forgotten. Silas sat at the table. He had a pen in his hand, a bottle of black ink, and a single sheet of crisp white paper. Next to the paper sat a bank draft. It was drawn from his share of the cattle sale, a substantial amount of money. He dipped the pen. He started to write. "Mrs. Thorne, you do not know my face, but you know my name. 3 years ago, I arrested your husband. I brought him to a jail where he passed away. I was completely, entirely wrong. He was an innocent man. He was a good father." Silas paused. He looked at the ink drying on the page. He didn't make excuses. He didn't explain the bounty, or the mistaken identity, or the crooked judge. Excuses were for cowards. "I cannot bring him back to you," Silas wrote. "I will not insult you by asking for your forgiveness, but a man must answer for his debts. Enclosed is the bank draft. It is enough to pay off your farm. It is enough to put your 3 children through school until they are grown. It is yours, legally and freely." Silas signed his name at the bottom, firm and clear. He folded the letter. He slipped the bank draft inside. He sealed the envelope with hot wax. He looked at the sealed letter. The heavy weight that had sat on his chest for 3 long years didn't vanish completely. It would always be there. But it didn't crush him anymore. It was just a scar. And scars meant you had survived. He pushed his chair back. He stood up. He walked over to the fire. He looked down at Mary. Her fingers moved rhythmically over the ledger paper, leaving her mark in the dark. "Do you want me to read that back to you?" Silas asked quietly. Mary stopped writing. She smiled. She didn't look up, but she reached out her free hand. "No," Mary said. "I know exactly what it says, but you can sit with me." Silas sat down on the braided rug beside her chair. He leaned back against her legs. She rested her hand on his shoulder. Her thumb traced the rough fabric of his shirt. The wind blew outside, rattling the window panes. It was a cold, lonely sound. But inside, the fire burned bright. Silas closed his eyes. He listened to the pop of the pine wood. He smelled the faint scent of lavender. He felt the warm, steady weight of her hand on his shoulder. He was home. Finally, and entirely, home. This channel is devoted to soulful cowboy stories filled with frontier romance, family bonds, sacrifice, tenderness, and timeless lessons from the American West. If this story warmed your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe so we can continue bringing these unforgettable tales to life together. All elements within this narrative are fictional and crafted for storytelling purposes. The author bears no intention of referencing real people, cultures, or events in a literal sense. Readers are encouraged to engage with the work as a piece of creative expression rather than documented reality.
When the storm finally settles over the mountain, what remains is not just the story of Silas Boone and Mary Caldwell, but a lesson about the kind of courage that does not always carry a gun. Sometimes courage is a blind woman refusing to surrender her dignity. Sometimes it is a broken man choosing truth over pride. And sometimes it is two wounded souls learning that real love is not about control, pity, or rescue, but about respect, honesty, and standing beside one another with equal strength. Mary teaches us that a person's value is never measured by what they lack, but by the fire they carry within. Silas teaches us that guilt and loneliness cannot heal a wounded heart. Only truth, forgiveness, and compassion can do that. In a world as cold and unforgiving as the frontier, this story reminds us that kindness is not weakness, and mercy is not surrender. It reminds us that every human being deserves the right to choose their own path, to be heard, to be trusted, and to be treated with dignity. The mountain may have belonged to Mary by law, but in the end, it became a home because both of them chose to protect what was right. And perhaps that is the greatest meaning of this story. Justice is not only found in courts or papers, but in the hearts of people brave enough to defend the vulnerable, forgive the broken, and love without taking away another person's freedom. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you to look deeper at the people around you, because sometimes the strongest souls are the ones the world underestimates most. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoy emotional Western stories about cowboys, frontier love, family bonds, motherhood, compassion, sacrifice, and the healing power of human kindness, please like this video, share it with someone who loves meaningful stories, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue riding together through the unforgettable landscapes of the Old West.